Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Chloe, and I'm from APLF team in Hong Kong, and I'm the host for today's webinar. So I would like to welcome everyone, whether you're watching this from home or in the office right now. So we've adopted a new working and living lifestyle, so it's more important to stay connected, to learn and exchange knowledge. So if you have any questions, just type in the Q&A box you see at the icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll reply you live or type the answer depending on the time. So just a brief intro, this is a sample room. So welcome everyone to Sample Room, the one and only social networking, B2B and sourcing platform for the leather and fashion industry. So do take time to explore and check it out after the webinar. And actually, this is also part of our second initiative, APLF Academy. So the Academy is actually launched to provide training programs like this one and hands-on knowledge for the industry to raise the sustainability awareness. So in the following 5 days of our launching event on Sample Room, we have invited speakers from the leather and fashion industries to share their viewpoints. So please stay tuned on our website and see what other webinar topics that are of your interest. So for this webinar, we've invited Anson from KPMG and Pat from KPMG China to be the speakers for this session. So Anson is currently a partner at KPMG based in Hong Kong office, heading up the consumer and retail practice in the ASPAC region. He has been active in driving a number of thought leadership reports and executive briefings covering innovation and consumers in China and across Asia. Our second speaker is Pat. He's a partner of KPMG China and is the global co-chair for sustainable finance for KPMG Impact. He has been active in the field of sustainable development for over 13 years. So he currently leads the sustainable finance practice in Hong Kong and is very active in developing ESG landscape for Hong Kong and international finance centers in the region. So that being said, please welcome Anson and Pat. Take it over.
Thank you, Chloe. A very good morning, everyone. Great to be with you at the Sample Room. And thanks to our friends at APLF for putting on this whole event. As we mentioned, Pat and myself look at a lot of different areas across consumer retail, but also what we have seen, of course, is we've seen the emergence of ESG and sustainability now, which is really becoming a very, very hot topic. So what we're going to do in the next half an hour is we want to share with you some of our insights. So we're going to share our screen right now, and we are going to go to kick off the presentation. And as mentioned, you know, what we wanted to talk to you this morning about was really looking a little bit about the future of sourcing. How's that going to impact leather and all types of products in the future for 2021 and beyond? So if we move forward, I was just going to share with you, we did this paper back in Q4 of 2020. We were talking to a lot of senior executives, and what we did see, of course, is that for the future, we saw that, of course, COVID-19 had disrupted a lot of manufacturing. It certainly affected a lot of the supply chains, but we're now going to see these new global digital supply chain services hubs appear, and Hong Kong is actually going to be one of these main hubs. And of course, here in Hong Kong, we still have a very high concentration of sourcing talent. We also see Hong Kong continuing its role as a regional hub. And of course, we also see the impact of the Greater Bay Area, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. But I think one of the key messages that we saw was the rise and rise of everything around ESG reporting and sustainability. That is been really, really important. Equally, we're also seeing lots of new technologies that are also going to allow businesses to operate more flexibly and seamlessly around the region and actually around the globe as well. So if we just move to the next slide, you know, the key messages, of course, with all sourcing organizations is they're going to have to use new digital technologies. the globalization of supply chains, that will happen, but we do see the emergence, of course, of, China is not going to go away, quite frankly, despite all the media reports, all the sensational headlines. But also we do see diversification. So we certainly see manufacturers now looking at, the next wave. Hong Kong is going to continue to be a super connector. And this is interesting. It's not just going to be the Greater Bay Area, but we actually see Hong Kong also as a super connector around the region. Big discussions right now about the shift from China. Yes, of course, if we look at footwear, if we look at textiles, leather, yes, there is a move, there is this movement from China, but China is still very, very dominant. But of course, we are going to see other markets. And I keep hearing about Vietnam. Again, Vietnam is not going to be the next China. It is a growing base for multinationals. But we do see this around the region as well. So we are going to see change in global export market shares. You can see there leather products as well. We do see Vietnam certainly benefiting. And if we look at, of course, places like Germany as well. So there's a number of different markets that we feel we are going to see increases in the market shares. Equally, of course, lots of people are looking at all of the other indexes around monthly minimum wage comparisons. And again, you can see here, China, as we know, has significantly increased in the last few years. But some of the other markets, of course, we talk a lot about Vietnam. We also talk a lot about Bangladesh. Of course, places like India, we think these markets are going to rise. And equally, Asia is going to start to scale up. I think a key message is that mainland China is going to continue to be a very sizable market for sourcing and as well as consumption. But we are also seeing a lot of these other places increase. And you can see Hong Kong is right in the center geographically, so it's very well placed. Equally, if we look at things like apparel, and I don't have the exact numbers on the leather projections, but in the next 10 years, you can see that Vietnam and Bangladesh are going to show the highest growth in production. For the US, imports, definitely the focus is on Vietnam. And if you look at the EU imports, then there's a big focus on Bangladesh. Again, Vietnam, definitely going to be one of these emerging sourcing markets. It already is. But then India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia as well. So what's driving change? Well, of course, production, logistics costs, trade agreements. That's going to be something we talk about a little bit later on. Process automation, but also sustainability. And my colleague here, Pat, will talk a little bit in more detail. And then quality at scale. Hong Kong is still going to be this gateway, as I said, to ASEAN as well. We see some interesting things in that space. And I just want to touch on this because RCEP is just something for all of us to think about, because back on November the 15th, 15 countries actually signed up to 15 countries actually signed up to this RCEP agreement. Why is this important? Well, it's the creation of a new free trade zone with a third of the world's population. Today, 29% of the global GDP, but in the next 10 years, that's going to rise to nearly 50% of the global GDP. 10 ASEAN bloc countries, along with China, with Japan, with South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. And of course, what's interesting here is that this is a landmark agreement because it's the first time that China and Japan have signed this kind of bilateral agreement, as well as South Korea and Japan signing as well. So we're going to see a harmonization of supply chains, elimination of a range of tariffs on imports, but we're also going to see the rise of e-commerce. And that, again, for all of us, is going to be something which is going to be really important when dealing with consumers. Okay, Pat, over to you.
Right, thanks, Anson. And I think that segues into kind of like just, you know, ESG and why we've seen kind of like this seismic shift in you know, this discussion. And I think that, I mean, you know, the leather industry, the fashion industry is really, I mean, we've been talking about sustainability for God knows how many years in the industry. But I think that it was previously predominantly in that compliance space, social compliance, environmental compliance, and, you know, and these audits. But I think that in the last 18 months, what we've seen is really that that shift into capital and sustainable finance. So, you know, the asset managers, the banks, and the insurance industry, these three industries effectively controlling all types of capital. If you need investors, if you need lending, if you need insurance, you have to go to these guys. They are very focused on it. And when you get these, get to talk to these money men, then everybody needs to listen. And that's why, you know, the last 18 months, there has been this increased discussion about ESG. And I think that, you know, with the investors really focusing on it, the regulators like the Securities and Futures Commission here in Hong Kong, and many regulators around the region like MAS and the like, are all focusing on kind of like getting the banks, the asset managers, and the insurance industry to do more disclosure. And from that perspective, I think, I mean, who are they going to disclose on? The investee companies or their lending customers or their trade finance customers, which is every industry, right? So, and so you cannot, once you touch capital, you really cannot let go of that. And you know, so the banks are going around checking if you know how you're kind of like managing this on an ongoing basis. And if you're not doing well and they continue to give financing to you, it's a risk to them, you see. And I think that's where it is at the moment. Equally within the supply chain, if you're not doing well, your customer is going to look bad. And so from that perspective, I think that, you know, everything is so connected that it has gone beyond just compliance. It's really about everyday business. And I think, I mean, you know, as I mentioned, the regulators are really gone onto this case, and the Hong Kong Stock Exchange last year launched this platform called Stage, which is on the right. And Stage is really for all kind of like green and sustainable products, and it's a green and sustainable exchange. And it really, the policy direction of Hong Kong, policy direction of China to really drive this. And Hong Kong is aiming to be the green and sustainable finance hub for the GBA and Asia Pacific. And I think that, I mean, you know, we can't shy away from what the consumers think. And we did this survey a number of years ago, and the numbers are pretty much similar, where, you know, I think that a lot of the consumers are more sensitive to this topic right now. And what is interesting to us was how, you know, we did this survey with Hong Kong, London, New York, Shanghai, and Tokyo. And it was very interesting how receptive the Shanghainese consumers were. And I think that, you know, ultimately China is the big juggernaut in the room and the biggest kind of like retail market. And so, you know, I think that we cannot shy away from that reality. So I think, I mean, on the ESG and the supply chains, Anson, I mean, you know that all these companies have signed up to these net zero commitments and all of that kind of stuff. What does this mean to everybody else?
Yeah, Pat, I think that's a very good question. You know, I think for all of us, what we are starting to see is there is a significant change with a lot of the big corporates now declaring that they're going to be net zero by a lot of them by 2030.
Yeah.
And I think that in itself is a massive challenge, saying one thing and doing something else. And there are significant issues. So my message, I think our message to everybody here is, if you have a supply chain, if you are moving products from point A to point B, if you are sourcing all of those materials, you are now going to have to get ready for this situation where you have these net zero commitments. And I was, in fact, Pat, you and I just a couple of weeks ago, we were sitting down with a number of our big apparel and footwear clients, and they were very clear in telling us that they needed help because their senior management have already signed up to the net zero goals. However, they now have to educate their suppliers, right? So one of the specific requests was, how could the KPMG team go in and support those suppliers? How can we better educate those different factories and suppliers about the need to reach those net zero goals, Pat?
And I think that it was quite interesting. I mean, they particularly looked at that footwear space, where I think that there is a lot of leather. And they felt that, in the apparel side, they were a bit more sorted, but in that footwear space is where, I think that they felt they needed to do a lot of work. And equally in those accessory spaces, like, kind of like handbags and all that kind of stuff, right? Where leather, there's a lot of leather. I think that's where kind of like, companies are very much focusing on. And I think that, this is the fashion charter, the UN fashion charter, which is this, kind of net zero commitment that the fashion industry has made. 118 brands have signed up so far. And I think that, for all of these guys, where is the biggest footprint is really in the supply chain, where it's, what we call scope 3 emissions, which is the supply chain. So I think, for all these guys, to be honest with you, the supply chain would probably be over 90% of their footprint. So, and when we checked on their reporting previously, it was all about, they're doing this on their shops and their offices, but that's a very small part of their whole overarching footprint. It is where the action is in the supply chain, and if they are going to get to those levels of commitment that the C-suite and the head office has signed them up to, how are you going to educate? How are you going to work with your suppliers to kind of like get to these commitments? And I think that this whole dynamic is going to change the way sourcing is done, and it does add this kind of like new kind of criteria as to selecting suppliers, and as you know, I used to be in the fashion supply chain, and it was so interesting how brands would change suppliers for a penny. And I don't know if they would do that anymore.
Yeah, I think you're right. In the old days, Pat, it was always about the lowest cost denominators.
Yeah.
And now it has changed significantly. And Pat, you've also been involved because you put out a couple of reports. One of them was around sustainable fashion.
Yeah.
What was the key messages?
Well, we did 2 reports on sustainable fashion. One was that consumer survey, where we surveyed those 5 countries and how they felt about sustainability. And as you can imagine, everybody's interested, but nobody wants to pay more, that kind of stuff, the usual. But I think that, the second one was really predominantly around, the UN Fashion Charter, and looking at how those signatories have reported so far, and very few of them had any supply chain data that was available to see what kind of reductions that they need to make in their supply chains. And I think as you know that the textile and apparel industry and has already, and the fashion industry has been looking at this for a number of years, and things like the Higg Index has come up as a global tool. And I think that now all of these things really need to be aligned to get that information out. And I think, this whole area of what they call science-based targets. So these are targets that have to be certified, that meets those Paris Agreement goals. And that's what the UN Fashion Charter has effectively signed up to, is alignment with the Paris Agreement. And that has a reduction of absolute terms. It's not kind of like, okay, I could kind of like buy these carbon offsets and I'm done. But anyway, those carbon offsets are increasingly expensive anyway. So how are you going to absolutely reduce your carbon footprint over time is something that, you know, these fashion brands have signed up to. It is a gargantuan task. And I mean, you know, I wouldn't really think that, you know, it's very much easier said than done. And the Financial Times, I think it was like last week or the week before, said in an article, they feel that all of these net zero targets are hollow commitments and are really calling companies out. So what have you done about it? And so I think that, you know, it's really kind of like moving up the C-suite. If they don't do it, then the investors, the banks, and all of these other stakeholders are really going to hold them to account to it. And I think that, I mean, you know, in order to really meet these net zero, really has the whole supply chain, the way that it's managed and supported and how business has been done has really, you know, has to change in some way or form. And it was really previously, because there was such an infinite supply before, that people were really just focusing on, well, who's the cheapest, and I'll just switch because there's always somebody cheaper and I can switch to that. But I think that when you are looking at to reducing your footprint, it is really the reduction of making unnecessary stuff and you know, and really moving towards that demand-driven model and working with your supply chain to make this happen and reducing your footprint. So it's not just customers and suppliers anymore. It's really, who are your supply chain partners and how are you going to manage this from a digital standpoint and from a sustainability standpoint. So I think that, you know, a lot of stuff is changing, and this whole area of data and traceability is going to be critical. And that's where kind of like Anson's focus and my focus really interlink between this digitization aspect of an organization and their supply chains and that kind of like ESG element. They are, you know, part of the same coin in many ways. And I think that, you know, it has to move into a much more demand-driven model rather than kind of like sourcing and creating all of this bullwhip effect, which is referenced in that future of sourcing paper, whereby, you know, I think there's so much oversourcing, oversupply, buying goods that nobody actually wants and then discounting them, you know, 50, 70, 90%, and still nobody wants it. And that's the reality of the industry at the moment. And I think that the industry is really coming to that point where it is coming to an existential realization. We need to really do things differently now.
Yeah, Pat, I think that, again, I think this is the other challenge that we've all got. You know, we do need to really focus on a much more sustainable future. And, you know, we are now talking to a lot of our clients about these issues. And I also just want to talk about the role of technology, because I think what we are going to see now is we are going to see a greater focus on technology and innovation. We're now starting to see the rise of some really interesting, cool startups that are very focused on ESG reporting and sustainability reporting, equally on things like 3D, you know, virtual sampling. And so you can see here, we've just listed out a few of these startups that are doing some really cool things. But then equally, some of the large players themselves now are starting to engage. They're starting to use technology innovation. They're starting to partner with those startups. And you can see the likes of Stella McCartney. You know, they've partnered with Google Cloud to actually build a tool that uses all of that, the data analytics and machine learning, to help fashion brands estimate their environmental impact of their production process. And again, I think we're going to see this. This is going to be the new reality for everybody. So we better get with the program. We really need to start, you know, understanding what can we do and how can we make our supply chains a lot more sustainable, and obviously equally in things like manufacturing, Pat, because I think another key message there is, are we going to see, a greater focus on product development, material innovation?
Yeah, this leather one is quite interesting, where, it's this new type of leather that's coming out, and I think that this is still a very small part of the market, but I think that when push comes to shove, companies will need to innovate, and I think that what we've seen in the supply chain aspect of this whole track and trace, and using blockchain to be able to track and trace not only chain of custody, but also the track and tracing of the carbon footprint, the water footprint, and all of that kind of stuff, is something that probably will come out in the future.
Yeah, and I think another key message here, Pat, is this is being driven across the entire supply chain, and the customers now, the consumers, those consumers are demanding you tell them about the origin of production. They're demanding that you also share with them the manner of production. So that is going to be really important moving forward. And we're going to have far greater transparency across all of the supply chains in the future. And this is a good example of how the KPMG team, using the latest blockchain and AI technologies, we are working with a large number of those big FMCG companies and other product companies, to really demonstrate that.
Yeah, and I mean, and these things are also happening in Hong Kong with the mills, and that platform, and how they have kind of like invested into a number of different startups doing this stuff, and you're very close to them.
Yes, and I think both of us have a very good relationship with the Nanfeng group. Nanfeng are, they own the mills, but this is a great example and just a great case in point. The mills used to be the largest cotton spinning mill in the whole of Asia. And of course, it went out, or it ceased operations, I think, back in the early 80s, became a warehouse for a period of years. And now they've completely repurposed the mills. They've turned it into a state-of-the-art retail experience, where you can see some very cool startups that are very focused on fashion, that focus on sustainability. They're all over there. And Pat and myself have spent quite a lot of time working with the Mills team, but also looking at how we can support them as they develop their journey around sustainability. Equally, they're doing some very cool things around product development and material innovation. And again, I think this is just a great example of, we're seeing a repurposing, a reimagining, but also innovation is really important. And we see lots of these innovation opportunities across materials and localized materials, digitized production, localized production, inventory management, digitized retail, employee support, because it's also about the people. And one of the key messages for all of us is that we are going to have to kind of upskill and reskill all of our people. And again, another huge focus is around ESG assessments as well, Pat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they're now doing more around food tech as well.
That's right. I mean, I think this is interesting, because food supply chain.
Yeah.
This is going to be a very, very hot topic.
Well, I think food, I mean, in the end, in order to tackle climate change, out of the top 20 things that you can do, 8 are food related. And I mean, everybody thinks, oh, it's transport, it's energy. Those are there, but food is a big deal. Because we waste so much food.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
that's right.
It is. And I think that, we're running out of time. We've done some reports around, net zero commitments, and their reporting. But I think that the aspect that we really want to leave you with is, I think ESG, look at it in a different light. I think it is, in the way that we interact with our clients is very different. I mean, there's rarely one meeting we don't go to that ESG is in there somewhere. And I mean, you know, it has moved from a side topic into a kind of central topic. And I don't think that ESG can be done without that support of technology. And I think that that's where that secret sauce is. But if we think that we can just go on doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, that's just not going to happen. And it really is going to need that kind of shift in mindset. Sure. And shift in the way that we do things, and really leveraging technology and leveraging on the existing partnerships that you have to get to that future low carbon economy.
Absolutely. So Pat, 5 key messages there. As we said, emerging technologies. We are going to see blockchain and AI with regards to track and traceability across the entire supply chain. Equally, innovation. We are going to have to work with those startups in the future. We also need to upskill and reskill our own people. I think that's a very key message. And as Pat rightly pointed out, purpose. We heard that time and time again in a lot of our research in 2020 about the fact is we are going to see this greater focus on ESG and sustainability. So again, we have to follow those consumers. We have to listen to those consumers, and those consumers are now changing their behaviors, but they're demanding more transparency. Yeah. They're demanding that you show them how, as I said, the manner of production, the origin of production. So we are going to see all of these things happen very quickly. And then just finally, just one other observation I just want to mention to you is the fact that, at KPMG, we put out a lot of research. As Pat said, Pat's worked on several reports, myself included. We've collaborated on these reports. This one is an interesting one, Consumers in the New Reality. Last year, we surveyed 75,000 global consumers. And again, a key message was this rise of purpose. The key message was consumers want to know that you are ethically sourcing those products. They really want to understand, as I said, the origin of the production, the products, as well as the manner of production. And I think that is going to be very key. And then final slide, just to share our contact details, Pat Wu, Anson Bailey. Feel free to download the KPMG reports because we have a lot of good material. The great news is it's there. It's on the KPMG website. It is free. It's all free of charge. So you can download all of these different reports using those QR codes. There's a lot of good material, as Pat said. We've been looking at supply chain resilience. We've been looking at ESG and integrating ESG into your business. And we've been looking at the future of sourcing and supply chains as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of our presentation. Chloe, maybe back to you, and we're happy to do any questions or if you've got any comments.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. It's quite interactive. And of course, as we can see from the PowerPoint slides, there are many materials out there. So just scan the QR code, you can learn more about the supply chain and the ESG. So we have received some questions, but due to time limit, we'll send it over to you and send them Pat after. And you can take a look at it and reply them with more thought and detail. And just to wrap it up, our next webinar will be at 2 p.m. So if you still like to learn more, you can come back after lunchtime Hong Kong. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.